Hello, Moley. How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. I am a little nervous.
Don't be nervous, Moley. Everything's going to be absolutely great. Good evening, folks.
Welcome, everyone.
Well, welcome, folks. Welcome to this evening. And it's with great pleasure, really, that I've got a role this evening, really, which is where I'm wanting to introduce you to Moley, which I know is a slightly strange thing to be saying on an evening relating to a psychotherapy course or to psychotherapy courses. I guess I'm doing this partly, of course, because I'm very proud of my wife, Julia, who's actually written this. But there's another particular reason apart from that, which specifically relates to the Moley books, really. So I don't know if you are familiar with them. If you are not, the first one that was published, you can see this, which is I think also behind Julia there, is A Mole Like No Other. And the one that has just come out, appropriately enough, just in time for Christmas, which is Moley and the Mysterious Sea Turtles, is the one, as I say, that's just come out now. And I guess that where I wanted to start off with this was to say a little bit about why I think it's of value to those of us who are counsellors, psychotherapists, CBT therapists, who are working in this particular field, really. For me, and I'm not just saying this because I'm clearly biased in this particular area because of Julia, but for me, I think these books are genuinely unique, and I think that they're unique for some particular reasons. So what I'm going to do is say a little bit about that, and also invite Julia in at various times just to sort of expand on various topics and ideas within it. But I want to start off by really emphasizing a point which I find myself surprised to have to be emphasizing basically in 2023, nearly 2024, which is this is a book which has a main character who is a counselor, who is also studying psychology. And I say that this is unusual, not because there are not books with counselors and therapists in them, fiction books I basically mean. But generally speaking, whenever you have a counselor or a psychotherapist or a psychologist within a fiction book, the book typically focuses on their role, their job in some particular way, and that plays a key part in the plot. That is not the case with these particular books and the latest one that's just come out. This is background information. So one of the key characters is a counselor, but apart from one or two small items in the book where, in a sense, this character's knowledge as a counselor and therapist comes through into the main dialogue. Most of the time, it's a backdrop to the book, and that particular role and job doesn't come to the forefront. Now, I suppose what I wanted to say about this is that I can't find any other novel which has normalized the role of a counselor or a psychotherapist in such a way. Every book that I have ever come across that involves a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a counselor lays a key emphasis on the role of that person's job. And you might say, well, yeah, that's understandable, isn't it? Well, actually, it's not, because if you look at the vast majority of fiction, you will often find that the job that the person or that one of the characters is actually engaged in is, in fact, in many instances, simply wallpaper to the actual book. It doesn't play a central role. And you might say, well, why is that important then, that this is different? And my answer to that is is that I think it plays a very big role in normalizing and depathologizing the particular job. It's not about being a counsellor fixed in a context of weird behavior or unusual behavior. It's not a counsellor or a therapist within the context, for example, of extreme experiences like trauma. Indeed, this is a role which is mentioned, but which is not really referred to during the course of the book. And if you think that it is important that our roles are simply seen as part of the natural and normal fabric of our society, then to be honest with you, I think we need to have more of these particular books that just treat this, to be blunt with you, as another profession, as another job. And can I just say, I don't know if you're aware of this, I've only become more aware of the statistics probably over the last 12 months, and in some instances over the last 6 months. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are 400,000 counsellors in the UK. And the latest data I've seen on people working in psychological jobs, so it's not just psychologists, but jobs which are psychological in nature, 750,000. So we're talking about a very large professional group here. And yet they are typically not referred to. They're not seen as normalized in any way. So for me, that's a very big thing. To make that even clearer and to emphasize the point even more, this is a children's book. And I have never come across a children's book. I'm quite open to hearing of other examples from you, but I've never come across a children's book that actually has an adult counsellor in a key role within that particular book. It's just unknown, really, for that. And for me, again, that's part of that's important, partly because it normalizes it again. But I think it also, for me, given the size of the mental health problems that are actually around for children and young people at this point in time, it flags up this particular role. It flags up this particular job as a job that exists. And it introduces, I genuinely think it introduces a lot of children and young people basically to this particular role. And I would hope it would play at least some role in increasing access or a willingness to actually go along and use such a service. Or at the very least, if we've got a young person who is going along to see a counsellor or a therapist and they have anxieties about it, or potentially they've maybe seen or heard other things which make them feel particularly uncomfortable, this will act as something of an antidote. And I genuinely hope, by the way, that although we're talking about these particular books this evening, I hope that it also inspires you and maybe other folks that you know to also be writing books which include counsellors, therapists, psychologists, simply as part and parcel of the normal jobs that adults might be doing in order to actually normalize them to young people. So that's one thing which, if I'm really honest with you, is probably the single most important thing to me about why I think that I wanted to mention and promote this. The second thing I sort of wanted to mention was that, probably not surprisingly, this book has a number of instances where psychological knowledge permeates the book, and where the primary character, who I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment, the primary character goes through an experience not only of being confronted by some very common childhood anxieties and concerns, from separation anxiety through to fear of flying, through to general worrying, where they're able to use some psychological ideas, basically, which are applicable to younger children in order to actually manage those. And it's done, can I emphasize, in a way which is not preachy. I think that, for me, one of the downsides of a lot of books that are written for younger people, and particularly for children, is they do have they have a slight feel that whoever's written them is trying to educate the reader. So that for me, they tend to often have a slightly preachy feel to them. And you might think, well, does that matter? And the brief answer is, well, yeah, it does matter actually, because kids are not stupid. And they often know when someone's trying to tell them something to actually do, which is fine in some instances and indeed is quite useful. But there are other instances, I think, where it can be off-putting. And I think one of the great things about some of the ideas in this particular book that this particular character both learns and obviously, by the way, indirectly, and I want to emphasize this, indirectly teaches the young reader as well, I think are done almost without noticing, that they almost become part and parcel of the fabric of the story of the book, rather than a particular message that's being given out to the reader. So I want to give you a few examples of those in a minute, but before I do that, I just really wanted to turn back to Julia just to really set the scene a little bit. So I guess the first question to ask is, who is Moley? Can you, for people who are not familiar with Moley, who is Moley?
Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to say we clearly have a bit of a problem with the chat, because it seems like people can only write to me or to you, Paul, and not to everyone.
Okay.
There's something with the setting, but I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, I'll keep an eye. I can see it. No other
people can write to us. So what I wanted to say, that the funny thing about these books, that I always say everything that happens in these books happened in real life. So Moley is a real character. He is a real toy who if you read the first book, we purchased this character, this toy, at the Easter Fair, exactly as it's written in the book. And he sort of had very much the life that as it is described in the book. So, but because he is such an expressive character, hello everyone, we took him everywhere with us on holidays and so on, and it just was landing itself perfectly for writing a book about him. And the first book, actually, what Paul mentioned about, I sort of write what I see around me. So in our family, I'm a doctor and Paul is clinical psychologist. So in the book, Dad is a doctor and Mom is a counselor. So, and actually in the book, there is one reference to a counseling session, but it's not done by Mummy. It's not done by the counselor. It's done by another toy, Owly, who was sitting in the room when Mummy was doing her degree, and she believes that just by observing Mummy, she learned everything about what it is to know about psychology and counseling. And she does an appallingly bad counseling session with a real life duck in the book. So you have an example of what counseling shouldn't be in the book. And just to mention, Paul, for Paul, it's a painful subject, counselors and psychologists on television, isn't it, Paul? Because as soon as a counselor or psychologist appears in some sort of series or film, Paul is starts cringing and saying, oh no, who is doing that? Nobody's doing sessions like that. So I can assure you that for him it's a painful spot, the way that our profession is portrayed in mass media. So sometimes it's just nice to know that they're there, like doctors, like builders, like, I don't know what professions, cooks, and other professions, and there are counselors, and that's absolutely fine, and children should get used to it. So there you go, that's Moley. And the books are about his adventures, and they're all real life adventures.
Well, that's great. I mean, just to say a little bit more about who, I mean, Moley is has quite a big network of people that he is involved with in his life. Certainly in the first book, he has involvement both with certain other toys, but he also has involvement with specific animals as well. And that, oh, there's Owly for a start. So each of these characters obviously has their own personality and their own types of interaction. Owly, by the way, is the one that does some very bad, I hate to say this, very bad didactic advice-giving counselling in the first book. You know, when Julie was saying that the how not to do it type approach, he provides an excellent illustration of that. But he also, Moley also has involvement as well and is able to communicate. I should emphasize this, is able to communicate with a variety of other animals. So in the latest book is actually about Owly's trip with the family. Oh, sorry, I should mention, sorry, not Owly, Moley's trip with the family. I should mention, by the way, that there's Mummy, there's Daddy, and there's Ainsley, isn't there? Ashley, sorry, as well. And so they're all going off as a family to Florida for a holiday, and so that is where the where the action occurs. And there's, I won't give you too much of the story away. I don't want to steal the thunder of the book, but the whole thing is focused around an ecological theme in many ways, which is about sea turtles and their laying of eggs on the beach and the dangers that are around for those eggs being hatched, and whether the young turtles are able to get to the sea or not. That's the basic thrust of the storyline. I won't tell you what actually happens. Whether they do get to the sea or don't get to the sea, I will leave that for you to find out. But that's the basic plot of it. I should say that although the Moley is able to talk to other toys and is able to talk to animals, he's not actually able to talk to humans. So actually humans on the whole don't know that he can communicate, although Mummy, who is the counsellor, there's one particular sentence in the second book which implies that Mummy has some sort of insight into the fact that he can communicate. But
well, in fairness, there's quite a few hints, both in the first book and in the second book, that Mummy, maybe because she knows psychology, maybe because she is a counselor, it's not explicitly stated, but she sometimes sort of winks at Moley and communicates with him as if she knows what he's getting up to in his spare time.
Yeah. So as I said, in the second book, there's, as there is in the first book, to be honest with you, a number of what I would describe as light touch scenarios, which make reference either to particular concerns that a younger child would actually have, or maybe even an older child would have. The age range for this book, by the way, Julia, is broadly speaking
5 to 10, I would say. For younger readers, it's parents or grandparents really should read aloud, because the book is a chapter book. It's not your typical, it's sort of done in the old-fashioned English children's book style. So the illustrations are black and white pencil illustrations. And there's quite a lot of text. So it's not that sort of type of book where you have a picture and one sentence underneath. So this is a proper chapter book. And so for younger readers, it's better if parents read them, and it lends itself very well for bedtime story, 1 chapter a night. And older children read it perfectly well themselves.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the feedback that you've got, isn't it, from the first book, in fact, in terms of the way in which it's been used. So as I said, one of the things that crops up in this book is that there are a number of issues which would be common concerns, I think, to particularly younger children, and also periodically some illustration, I think would probably be the best way of putting it, illustration of a more constructive psychological approach to some of these worries, but in a language which is understandable by younger children. So what I'm just going to do is to read you a short selection of some of these, just to give you a flavor of the actual approach. So I'll start off with just an early brief reference to Moley getting ready to go off on holiday, and it's going to involve him leaving all of his friends. Moley, by the way, just to prime you for this, is a natural worrier. He takes things very seriously, and he worries about things and hopes that they'll always go right, and he's very worried about if they're not going to go right. So if I can just read this. So he's getting ready to go, and it says, their departure was so swift that Moley hadn't had a chance to talk to his friends about any arrangements that should be put in place while he was away. How would they manage all of their duties without him? And indeed, the duties were great indeed. And he goes on to talk about his particular worries. In that particular first reference to this, there's no specific attempt about how to resolve that. But the idea behind this particular example is simply to flag up that this might be a common concern that a younger child might be able to relate to. Moving forward, and about the use of some form of positive self-talk, really. So this is a particular scene where the family is going into the airport and is basically about to go through security. And they're having to put their bags onto the conveyor belt, as is common, obviously, in airports. But unfortunately, Moley is in one of these bags. And as far as Moley is concerned, he's basically going to be toppling over the edge of a cliff when that can.
Because he reads the line saying backdrop.
Right,
so
backdrop.
He's very scared of the words drop. He doesn't want to be dropped in a bag. So yeah.
So and it says here, what could he do? What could he do? The moving belt was getting nearer, and Moley was getting more anxious by the moment, until suddenly a very bright thought occurred to him. I love Ashley, but Ashley loves me as well. He will not allow someone he loves to drop over the cliff edge. I should trust him. With this resolution in mind, Moley sighed deeply and looked ahead with hope. The Richard family reached the counter and started putting their luggage onto the moving belt. Moley held his breath. He did not die. He could breathe out again. Very interesting, this particular example.
There was no line, he did not die, Paul.
I know there's not.
You're making it up. Okay.
Yeah. Just to shorten it. Yeah. This reminds me, actually, really interestingly, of something that's been in my mind ever since I saw it, which was I went to a conference last year where there was a particular presentation on the whole issue of intolerance of uncertainty, and how difficult is tolerating uncertainty is such a central element in so many problems. And in the presentation, one of the photographs that was shown was of a young child standing at the edge of a swimming pool who was being encouraged by their father to jump into the pool. Okay, the child can't swim, it's at the deep end, and on the one hand, Dad's saying it's fine, we'll do it, just do it. And on the other hand, obviously the child is thinking to themselves, am I going to drown? I won't be able to touch the bottom. What's going to happen? I can't swim. And one of the key things that was emphasized, particularly in this presentation, is how does the child get to the point of jumping in without certainly knowing that basically they're going to live. And the brief answer is trust in dad, basically. So that idea about trust in a figure that you know that cares for you and has concern for you, I think is a really important thing for children to hold on to. And I do appreciate there are some parents that are not very good at this, but there are a lot of parents that are good at this, and I would say it's the norm. But maybe what this emphasizes and communicates is the fact that maybe parents and adults need to make that clearer to children in order to actually give them that confidence to take risks. And the whole issue of risk taking is a big issue these days. We seem to live in an environment which is polarized, in my opinion, between either the idea of taking no risks whatsoever and being very afraid of doing a lot of normal activity. I mean, the whole idea of playing outside is probably one of the best examples I can think of that. But on the other hand, we see some of the craziest risky behavior amongst young people as well. It's almost like they have not gone through a process of knowing how to judge risk and to make judgments about knowing when you can take a risk and how you decide whether it's safe or not safe. And I just think that particular example provides just one pointer in that particular direction. There's another worrying situation for Moley after they land. They've landed in Florida, they've got into the car, they're driving to where it is they're going to stay, and they are going to have to drive over a very steep bridge. I don't know how well you know this part of Florida. Yeah, I've got a copy of the picture here as well. Oh, we're both doing it here. It's if you ever go there, it's a crazily steep bridge. I mean, the first time I saw it, I thought, oh God, do cars fall over backwards when they go up this bridge? So I can fully understand how a toy with no experience of life really is likely to feel very anxious about that. And it says here, Moley was about to start worrying whether the road continued on the other side, because he couldn't see the other side of the bridge, or whether they would just drop off, bags and all. But he reminded himself of his newly found resolution to trust the experts. The experts here, by the way, are mummy and daddy. So again, there's some guidance here for children about how do you make decisions about dealing with uncertainty. And the brief answer is you take some guidance and trust from an adult that you know you can rely on in some particular way. Another issue that commonly crops up, I think, in the latter part of the book is that Moley is in a position where he is meeting a range of basically beach creatures in Florida, and they are not, I mean, partly, by the way, there's a cultural clash, which we've not mentioned, I think, between some of the Floridian creatures, American creatures, and Moley, who is, well, that certainly strikes me as being a very English toy meeting some very American animals.
Well, he noticed it himself, Moley, that for some strange reason, and probably we all can relate to it, when you are meeting somebody from different culture, like in this situation in America, you become even more English than you are at home. So suddenly he starts talking very formally in a very posh accent, and he asks himself, why am I talking like Owly suddenly? But that happens quite often. Yeah.
So he's confronted by these different creatures, some of whom he specifically doesn't like, in fact, or in some instances sees as potentially dangerous. but he actually, it's an interesting question, actually. I must ask you about this later on. I don't know how much of his attitude is determined by a pre-existing assumption that it's possible to find the good in people, or whether the circumstances in some way force him to discover that and force him into a negotiating role. But that certainly does crop up. So, for instance, there is a particular scenario where already within the book, Moley has decided that he is responsible for ensuring that the turtle eggs on the beach that have been laid and buried on the beach, that the turtle eggs on the beach basically will all hatch safely. And he's looking around for help. I mean, can I just say, there's a great underlying theme throughout all of these books, which is you try and ensure that you're not trying to do things by yourself, that you bring to bear help and support from those people you can actually trust. And anyway, so he comes across this crab whose name is Brad the crab, if I remember correctly. And Brad the crab has already mentioned that he finds eggs very tasty. So not surprisingly, Moley is already worrying about, can I involve Brad the crab in this? Can't I involve him in it? And this is the way in which he approaches it. Bear with us, let me get to the first part of Brad the crab. Yes, Brad said, all crabs eat eggs, grown turtles eat us. It's life, it's cool. Moley didn't like the sound of that, but decided to be honest with Brad. You see, he said, I promised to look after the nest of my friend Shelley. That's Shelley the turtle, appropriately enough. It's her first nest, and I can't allow anything to happen to it. If you or any of your relatives decide to attack it, I will have to fight you. You're bigger than me, said Brad. I'm not going to fight you. Let's make a deal. What deal? Asked Moley. You give me food that's better than eggs, said Brad. Like what? Said Moley. Worms, he said. I don't have any worms. Shrimps. Nope. Fruit then. Yes, said Moley excitedly. There was always leftover fruit in Ashley's lunchbox because Ashley was too busy on the beach to eat. You bring me fruit, I like fruit, then I help you by not eating the eggs. Now, at one level, this is a crazily simple piece of dialogue. But for a young child, it highlights a number of things. It highlights, first of all, that when you're confronted by a problem, being direct and asking is an important first step. So it's very, very simple assertiveness training for, in this particular instance, Moley, or his expression of assertiveness. It also emphasizes something which is a topic which is very close to my heart in the whole behavior change field, which is that actually, oddly enough, I was talking about this earlier today in a training session, which is, why do our clients have problems? Our clients have problems not because they do the wrong thing. Our clients have problems because they do repeatedly the same wrong thing. That's what tends to lead them to have problems. And actually, you know, it's a bit like the old story. If you're in a hole, just stop digging. And if someone was to say, well, I don't know what to be doing instead, the obvious answer is anything at all apart from digging. One thing you do know is that digging doesn't work. How do you find that out? What is the best way of doing that? Well, there's a number of ways of finding that out. You could ask people, but another way is just to try things out. Trial and error learning is an incredibly underestimated way of solving problems. I mean, you think about it, folks. I bet you on a daily basis and through your life, you've been confronted by problems which you don't, when you're confronted by them, you don't know what the answer is. And yet somehow or other, you have got through those. And very often we get through these just by trying different things out. The first thing may not work. The second thing may not work. The third thing may not work. But on the fourth instance, it works and it produces the result that we get to, which is what I'm just trying to emphasize with the fact that worms and shrimps here did not produce the result. But by persevering and trying other things, eventually he obviously settles on a particular solution. And I think that idea of, you know, to be honest with you, whether we're talking about young people or adults, if our clients were to be more experimental in the way in which they approach problems, they wouldn't have so many problems. But unfortunately, people either only use one way of responding to things, or they maybe use more than one, but it's too narrow a repertoire of responses. So I think encouraging young people to try out different things, but I hope you can see it's not done in a preachy way. I mean, I hope you can also see, by the way, that from an adult perspective, if you're actually reading this, this can easily represent a springboard into a general discussion about what that particular child would be doing in similar sorts of circumstances. So it opens up the child as well to a discussion of such particular things. So there's loads of other examples of this in the book. I just wanted to take that as a selection, so you've got some broad idea really about how some of these ideas are communicated in the book without sounding like it's a counselling session and without sounding too preachy, but where there's a thread that's running through there, which is about recognition of problems, recognition of worries, and also a demonstration of how a character basically comes to grips with these or overcomes these in some particular way. I'd like to sort of, in a sense, move away a little bit from the book at this point and just ask Julia some questions, probably much more about the writing of this as a book and the way in which it's written, more than some of the psychological messages that are actually in it. So I guess one of the first things, which it may be that some people have already recognized from the examples that I've actually given this evening, is that the language in the book, to be blunt with you, is not particularly childish. And you know, there are some occasional big words in this, and I just wondered if you could say a little bit about whether that was a conscious decision, if it was, what led you to make that decision, and so on and so forth.
Yes, I wanted to say, before we go into language issue, this issue with psychological techniques, methods, approaches, I wasn't writing it with them in mind.
Sure, no.
I think probably being exposed to all of them on a daily basis, you know, made me make certain decisions in terms of where the character goes and how the character thinks. But I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to use a bit of CBT here. Although when Paul was reading the book, he said, oh, you use CBT here, you use mindfulness there. It wasn't done consciously, but clearly it is there. In terms of the language, I deliberately didn't want to dumb down the language, and I used big words. Moley likes big words. In the first book, he says that he wouldn't use a short word if the long one will do. So he prefers to use long words. And I personally think it is very good for children to be exposed to rich language, to interesting words, unusual words. And what's particularly interesting for me is that the first book was read by several classes in Australia, in Abu Dhabi, and in America. And lots of words were used which are not common. Even Paul had to look them up. Some of them he had to look up in the dictionary. But I asked the teachers, were children Did they stumble? Were not they put off by these long words? And the American teacher said, well, the only word they couldn't understand was secatus, because they don't use secatus in America. All the other words, when they are descriptive, when they are within sentences, I think children manage perfectly well to make sense of them. Even if they don't quite understand the meaning of the word, I think they just grasp it intuitively. And I think just using a rich language is always good. So no, I'm not dumbing it down for kids. Obviously, there are some short sentences and short interactions, especially when Moley talks to different characters in America. Some small words, they are very, very short in what they're saying. But it's not because I'm doing it for children, it's just because it fits the particular character.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's interesting. It leads in really to my next question, which is, I guess, how you managed to write the book. Now, I know that sounds a slightly strange question, but let me just explain why I'm asking it. Lots of people have books in their heads. I'm near enough as guilty as this as anybody, and I have terrible problems putting pen to paper or the equivalent. In addition to that, you've written a children's book here in English, which I'm sure you don't mind me saying to people is not your first language.
So
yeah, so what I guess the first question is, why did you do it? But I'm also particularly interested in your insights into what it was that helped you to do it. Because I think if there was anybody here who's ever thought about writing themselves and they either don't get round to it or it's an issue for them, I'm just sort of interested to know, really, I suppose, if I'm honest with you, what techniques or attitudes or ways of thinking or things that you organize for yourself to help you to actually achieve the completion of the book. But maybe we'll start off with the slightly easier question about what led you to write a book in the first place.
Well, I always wanted to.
Right.
I always, when I was young, I was writing sort of historical romances and things like that. Never published, but I always wanted to write. And when I came to this country, I can say absolutely, definitely, England produced, or Britain produced, the best children's literature in the world. Because it's just, well, other countries have some good authors, but Britain is just author after author after author, and classic after classic after classic for children. So I think the country itself inspires you. And secondly, I just love children. I love children. I love communicating with them. And when I was studying to be a doctor, at some point in my life, I actually wanted to retrain and to become a children's doctor. And I was advised against it, but I just love working with children and loved writing for them. But because English is not my first language, it took me 7 years of basically fighting the imposter syndrome with the first book, because the book was ready. I've written it by pen with, longhand. I write longhand. It was ready, but I just felt I didn't deserve, I couldn't dare to present it to English public to read, because they would all turn around and say, it's not your language, you can't speak English, how dare you to write a book in English? But you know what helped? Before publishing Moley, in between, sort of within those 7 years, I wrote a book which is called Mr. Darcy's Guide to Pemberley, which was sort of a variation of Pride and Prejudice. And that actually helped, because if I am going to be daring, I'll be daring writing a variation of Pride and Prejudice, and that was sort of even bigger cheek. So yeah, but imposter syndrome was terrible. And then we did, if you remember, we did a video on Socratic questioning, which is actually available to buy. And I was a client in that video, and I was talking about my difficulties with writing, and just unpacking it within that video really helped. And then I thought, okay, I'll sign up for the writing class. And I met an amazing woman who's become my editor since. It's Susanna Waters, and she's actually a sister of Mark Rylance. You know Mark Rylance, the actor? So Susanna is his sister. And just meeting Susanna made me feel it's possible. I can do it because I sort of have your help and Susanna's help, and just encouragement, and that it's normal, it's okay, you can do it. But perfectionism and imposter syndrome, I think they're two biggest culprits for everyone who is trying to write. These are the things which you have to fight with. Because my first book was proofread probably 7 times by different people. And at the end, they started coming back to me with suggestions which counter, what's the word?
Contradicted each other.
Contradicted, yes, exactly. Contradicted each other. So at that point, I thought, okay, enough. Because this is now a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of grammar. It's not a matter of correct or not correct. One thinks this way, another one thinks this way. And you have to stop at some point.
So can I just push this a little bit further, because I do find that I find this quite interesting. So obviously having or finding an advocate, mentor, and cheerleader was important for you in terms of finding that editor. What about, I mean, but you know, we know with imposter syndrome that voice on our shoulder can return very, very easily and very, very frequently. What did you do, or what did you say to yourself that helped to ensure that it didn't dictate your behavior? So you weren't in a position where basically this remains on your computer or in a drawer, but it never goes further. What else helped you? What did you do? What did you say to yourself that was helpful in that context?
Well, I think at some point I started asking myself a question. What would I regret more? Never publishing it at all, or publishing it and having a few not very good reviews? So, because at some point you just think, okay, you either go ahead or you just leave it. And I just knew that I wanted that character out there, you know, even if 3 children, you know, like him, that's worth it, isn't it? So for me, it's important to get him into the world and see what happens.
Well, that's I think, generally speaking, a very, very useful and important lesson to bear in mind. So many of our clients ruminate about what if I do such and such. But actually, what's sometimes helpful is to actually spend some time ruminating about what happens if I don't.
If I don't, yes.
You know, so many of our clients are sort of pushed into a position of passivity and inaction because they're worried about the what if on the basis of the action, but they don't actually spend time considering the what if I don't. I think that sometimes we need that. We need to, so basically, I would argue, to selectively attend to the thing that we normally selectively ignore, which is taking no action at all. Because there's a myth there, isn't there? There's a myth that if I don't take action, then I'm safer. But actually, as you quite rightly say, if you reflect on that and explore it, actually the outcome can feel and can be much worse. And also, I mean, we haven't got time to go into this in further detail at the moment, but I also suspect that when you reflected on the potential downside of publishing, the downside didn't feel as intolerable or unbearable as it first seemed to be. It's obviously not desirable, but it didn't feel such. It's a bit like, to be honest with you, coming back to the metaphor I used earlier, it is a bit like, you know, the child trying to weigh up, you know, what's better for me, standing here on the edge of the pool, or alternatively jumping in, but with dad just in front of me, ready to keep me safe. Yeah.
Well, that is another thing, because I've decided to go down the route of self-publishing, because I joined quite a lot of author communities and things where people discuss their books and their struggles. And I read stories about people struggling with finding agents and finding publishers. And I just thought, and it's like a repeated story of rejection, 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 rejection. And that I wasn't prepared to face. So I thought, okay, I will pay for it myself. I will find the illustrator myself. But I don't want to go through this repeated experience of rejection. That I wasn't prepared for. Maybe when you're younger, when you have lots of time ahead of you, you can sort of invest a bit more time. So for me, it was important to let the character out. And then if somebody one day finds him and wants to represent him, fine. But to go that way and go through repeated rejection, I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah, and I think that was a good decision. And we've sort of seen the results, haven't we, in terms of sales as well. I need to bring things to an end now, folks, because
I just wanted to say, because everybody just writes to me directly, we don't have a chat as such. Jenny is asking about the process of self-publishing and finding the illustrator and promotion and all of that. We probably can have session for those who are thinking of self-publishing a book. We could have a separate session on that and just discuss those things. I just wanted to open it up to people, because we've been talking just two of us, Paul.
Sorry.
Let's just, if you have anything to say, guys, please. And it's a Christmas evening, so Christmas Thursday. So please do. If anybody, just unmute yourself, because chat doesn't work clearly.
I'd just like to say, Julia, how much I enjoyed your first book. And I did put a little something on Amazon, I think, at the time. I have actually got your second book, but I haven't quite got round to reading it yet. But I think my feeling with the first book was very much how, as a speech and language therapist, I really kind of valued the language side of it. And you know, it was so rich. The language was so rich, and the descriptions, all of that. I thought it was a joy to read. And I'm interested in the next one, because of all the things that you've pointed out today about you know, some of the anxieties that children have, and so I'm looking forward to reading it, and congratulations to you as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I promised to share with you a few new courses which Paul is offering very soon. So let's go to that, and I will open. Yes, if you go on SDS website and go to special offers, let me just make my screen smaller. So
we've got black boxes showing here, unfortunately.
well, we can see the main thing. So
Sure.
the first course I wanted to mention to you, because it's currently on a very good offer, and first 15 bookings only will get this price, is working with narcissism. We felt there was quite a lot of interest in working with narcissism, and not much offered in terms of sort of evidence-based presentation on the topic. So it's a 3-part course, and at the moment it's better than half price offer. So 10th to 24th of May, only 3 parts of 3 hours, I think. So it's 9 hours altogether. And please book that if you want to go for that particular price. The next thing I wanted to mention is the course Paul is going to do in March, and it's self-esteem in adolescence. Paul's been training on self-esteem for many years, but this is specifically designed for working with adolescents. It's 2-part of 3 hours, so it's a full day course altogether, but split into two parts. So again, it's a half price offer for the first 15 bookings. And also Paul is going to do a certificate in essential CBT techniques. This will be 2-hour sessions, theory and then demonstration with one of the people from the group. So you can book the whole certificate with this amazing price, or you can book individual sessions. So Paul is starting in February with using the 5-factor model. So, and it will be, I think, 6, isn't it? 6 sessions throughout the year. So these are 3 new courses, which we haven't really started advertising yet, but I wanted to share with you if you want to take advantage of these amazing offers. They are there for you just before Christmas. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, because we knew the session is not really our normal SDS Thursday, but I am very grateful for you sparing an hour of your time talking to us about my new book. And you know, like, new book is like a baby, you know, you love it and you want it to do well. So thank you so much, and have a very, very Merry Christmas, and hopefully next year will be more prosperous and peaceful and just normal. What we want is a bit more normality in our life. You can unmute yourself and say your goodbyes, and thank you very much. See you next year.
Take care, folks. Look, and have a good new year as well. Happy New Year as well. Take care.
Thank you.
Look after yourselves.
Yes.
Take care.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Have a good New Year too.
Thank you.
Take care. Look after yourselves.